They say the deadliest force isn't the one that boasts about its power, but the one that waits silently until provoked. When the Thunder Legion motorcycle gang roared into Oak Hollow's farmers market, they thought they were dealing with a defenseless old woman. They couldn't have been more wrong. Margaret Walker had spent 15 years keeping a secret, one that was about to turn this peaceful Saturday morning into a harsh lesson about power and consequences. Her son wasn't just another soldier serving overseas. He was Commander David Walker, one of the most lethal Navy SEALs ever to complete the training. And these bikers had just made the worst mistake of their lives. They threatened his mother. Some say you can measure a person's strength by the company they keep. Others say true power lies in knowing when to use it. Today, a gang of arrogant bikers is about to learn both lessons the hard way, discovering that they didn't just pick a fight with a farmer's widow. They started a war with a family that knows exactly how to end one. Let's take a quick break. Tell us, where are you tuning in from? If this kind of content speaks to you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special. Morning dew still clung to the fresh vegetables as Maggie Walker arranged the produce display at her market stand. The early summer sun cast long shadows across the marketplace, where local vendors were setting up their stalls for what promised to be another busy Saturday. At 68, Maggie moved with practiced efficiency, her silver hair tied back in a practical braid, her keen eyes checking every detail of the presentation. The tomatoes are particularly good this week, she called out to Mrs. Henderson, who had been their first customer every Saturday. For as long as anyone could remember, the elderly woman smiled, picking up one of the rich red fruits and examining it with expert eyes. Your husband always did have a way with tomatoes, Mrs. Henderson replied, adding several to her basket. How is David doing? I haven't seen him in the news lately. Maggie carefully adjusted a basket of fresh herbs before answering. He's back at his base, said he might get some leave soon. She didn't mention the strange tension in his last phone call, or the way he'd asked her to keep their emergency protocols ready just in case. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm, a steady stream of regular customers mixing with summer tourists who had discovered Oak Hollow's charm. Maggie found comfort in the familiar routing, weighing produce, making change, sharing recipe tips with customers. The market had been her second home since childhood, when she would help her father sort vegetables while dreaming of her own farm someday. Frank Morrison, Oak Hollow's sheriff, stopped by her stand mid-morning. His casual demeanor couldn't quite hide the concern in his eyes. Quiet morning, Maggie. Is always frank, though you're not usually one for farmers market rounds. The sheriff picked up an apple, turning it in his hands. Had some reports of motorcycle activity on the county roads. Thought I'd check and make sure everything's okay here. Maggie's hand stilled briefly on the display she was arranging. The Thunder Legion could be they've been pushing into new territory lately. Just keep your eyes open. Okay. After Frank left, Maggie found herself watching the market entrance more carefully. She'd raised David alone after losing her husband, taught him everything she knew about standing up for what's right now. Those lessons might be more important than ever. Jack Peterson from the neighboring farm joined her at the stand, helping to restock the corn display. Saw some bikes on Route 27, he said quietly. Mean-looking bunch, not the usual weekend riders. They're just passing through, Maggie replied, though her hand unconsciously touched the cell phone in her pocket, the one Dia had given her, programmed with a special emergency contact protocol. The morning wore on, the sun climbing higher, but a subtle tension had crept into the market's atmosphere. Vendors exchanged worried glances, parents kept their children closer. Everyone remembered what happened in Millbrook when the Thunder Legion decided to expand their territory. Martha Henderson returned to Maggie's stand, ostensibly for more tomatoes. Maybe we should pack up early today, she suggested, her voice low. Those bikers people saw I heard they've been causing trouble in 3 counties. This is my livelihood, Martha. I can't run every time there's a rumor of trouble. Maggie's voice was firm, carrying the same quiet strength that had helped her raise a son alone while running a farm. The first distant rumble of motorcycles came just before noon. The sound rolled across the fields like approaching thunder, growing louder with each passing moment. Maggie watched as worried faces turned toward the noise as conversation stopped mid-sentence, as the peaceful market morning transformed into something darker. Sheriff Morrison reappeared, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. Maggie, maybe you should. I'm staying frank, she continued, arranging her produce, each movement deliberate and calm. This is my home, my market, my community. The rumble grew closer, and now they could hear individual engines. The sound of multiple motorcycles was approaching fast. Maggie thought about David, about all the times he tried to teach her self-defense moves during his visits home, but more importantly, she thought about what he really taught her, that true strength isn't about physical power, but about standing your ground when it matters most. The first bikes appeared at the market entrance, chrome gleaming in the midday sun. The Thunder Legion had arrived in Oak Hollow, and with them came a choice: stand up or stand down. As Maggie Walker watched them approach, she knew her quiet Saturday morning was about to become something else entirely. What the bikers didn't know was that they weren't just threatening a farmer's widow, they were about to learn why some people, like some storms, are most dangerous when they appear perfectly calm. The Thunder Legion's arrival brought an immediate change to the market's atmosphere. 12 motorcycles, their engines growling like predators, formed a deliberate line across the entrance. Their leader, Chuck the Hammer Davidson, cut an imposing figure as he dismounted. 6'4" of leather and muscle, with a graying beard and eyes that had seen too many violent nights. Well, Chuck announced, his voice carrying across the now silent marketplace. Ain't this just the sweetest little setup? His eyes roamed the stalls, taking in the fresh produce, handmade crafts, and nervous faces of the vendors. Especially sweet. Maggie continued arranging her tomatoes, each movement deliberate and precise. She'd seen men like this before, bullies who mistook fear for respect. Behind Chuck, his gang members spread out through the market with practiced efficiency. Name's Chuck, he announced, stopping at Maggie's stand. Most folks call me the Hammered. He picked up a tomato, tossing it carelessly from hand to hand. What's a nice little operation like this paying for protection these days? We don't need protection, Maggie replied, evenly, her voice carrying clear lie despite its softness. Oak Hollow takes care of its own. Chuck's smile didn't reach his eyes. That's what Millbrook said too. Now they pay on time every time. He let the tomato drop, watching it splat against the pavement. Oops. Sheriff Morrison appeared nearby, his stance casual but ready. Might want to pay for that, friend, or would? Chuck turned slowly, taking in Morrison's uniform. You going to stop us, you? And what army? Frank. Maddie said quietly. I can handle this. She met Chuck's gaze directly. That'll be $2 for the tomato. One of the bikers, a younger man with a snake tattoo coiling up his neck, laughed sharply. Lady, you don't seem to understand how this works. We don't pay you, pay for protection, for peace of mind, for keeping your nice little market safe from accident. Martha Henderson stepped forward, her aged voice trembling but determined. We've never needed protection before. Times change, Chuck replied, his attention still on Maggie. World's getting dangerous. Small towns like this, they need friends, strong friends. Maggie's hand brushed against her phone, thinking of David's instructions. One warning, he told her, that's all you give them. After that, you call me. But she wasn't ready for that yet. This was her home, her market, her responsibility. Oak Hollow isn't Millbrook, she said firmly. We don't want any trouble. Chuck's voice carried mock concern. We're just businessmen looking to provide a service. Ain't that right? Boys around the market, his gang members, had positioned themselves strategically. Some were examining stands with exaggerated interest. Others were just standing, watching. Their presence a clear threat. 20%. Chuck continued. That's our standard rate, small price to pay for guaranteed safety. Sheriff Morrison stepped closer. That sounds an awful lot like extortion. Sounds like business to me, Chuck countered, unless you want to make it something else. His hand rested casually on his leather vest, where the outline of something heavy was visible. The market had gone completely silent. Vendors watched with barely concealed fear. Parents held their children close. This wasn't just about money, it was about control, about breaking a community spirit. I'll give you time to think about it, Chuck said, his voice deceptively pleasant. Talk it over with your friends here, but don't take too long. He looked directly at Maggie. Hate to see anything happen to all this nice produce. As the gang leader turned away, Maggie noticed something that others might have missed. These weren't just Ordinary thugs, their positioning, their awareness. The way they moved, it reminded her of David's military friends. These men had training you okay, Maggie, Frank asked. Quietly after Chuck had moved to another stand, they're not just here for protection money, she replied, her voice low. Look at how they're operating. This is about territory, about control. Frank nodded, slightly noticed that they're too organized for simple intimidation. Question is, what's their real goal? Maggie watched as the Thunder Legion members continued their slow tour of the market. Each interaction was calculated, each threat subtle but clear. They were mapping the community, identifying strengths and weaknesses. They'll be back, Martha said, joining them just like in Millbrook. First, it's protection money, then they start taking over businesses, bringing in their own people. Not here, Maggie stated firmly, not in Oak Hollow. She thought about the emergency phone in her pocket, about David's capabilities. But calling him would mean escalation, would mean bringing a different kind of violence to Oak Hollow. There had to be another way. Chuck's voice carried across the market as he finished his rounds. Think carefully about our offer, folks. We'll be back this afternoon for your answer. His eyes found Maggie again. Some offers only come once. As the Thunder Legion mounted their bikes, the rumble of engines filling the morning air, Maggie made her decision. She wouldn't call David, not yet. First, she would try to handle this her way, with the quiet strength that had sustained her through decades of farming, through losing her husband, through raising a son alone. But as she watched the bikers ride away, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Thunder Legion hadn't chosen Oak Hollow by chance. They were here for a reason, and whatever that reason was, it went far beyond simple extortion. The market slowly came back to life. But the atmosphere had changed. There was fear now, yes, but also something else, determination. Oak Hollow had faced challenges before. They would face this one too, together. What the Thunder Legion didn't understand was that some communities, like some people, grow stronger under pressure, and Maggie Walker had spent a lifetime teaching her, done that very lesson. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In the wake of the Thunder Legion's departure, Oak Hollow's farmers market buzzed with nervous energy. Vendors gathered in small groups, voices low and worried. Sheriff Morrison had taken up position near the market entrance, his presence both reassurance and reminder that trouble would return. Maggie began cleaning up the splattered tomato, her movements precise and unhurried. Martha Henderson knelt to help, her arthritis stiffened fingers. He'll nimble enough for the task. You're thinking about calling him, aren't you? Martha asked quietly. She was one of the few who knew the full truth about David's military career. Not yet, Maggie replied, straightening up. David has enough battles to fight overseas. This is our home, our problem. Jack Peterson joined them, his weathered face grave. These aren't like those troublemakers we had last summer, Maggie. The Thunder Legion, they've got a reputation. What they did to Millbrook, I remember Millbrook. Sheriff Morrison interrupted. Approaching their group started just like this, protection money. Then they brought in their own people, took over businesses. Within 6 months, they owned half the town. Maggie studied the market grounds, watching people try to return to their normal routines. What aren't you telling us, Frank? This isn't just about territory, is it? The sheriff glanced around before lowering his voice. Got word from state police. Thunder Legion's been expanding, but not randomly. They're targeting specific towns with strategic value. Strategic for what? Martha asked. Location, infrastructure. Oak Hollow sits at the crossroads of 3 counties. We've got the railway depot, the grain storage facilities, perfect for moving things that shouldn't be moved. Maggie concluded. Her years of listening to David's careful explanations of tactical thinking hadn't been wasted. A young mother approached Maggie's stand, trying to shop normally. Despite the tension, Maggie served her with practiced efficiency, but her mind was working through the implications of what Frank had said. They'll be back at noon, Jack said after the customer left. What are we going to do? We're going to prepare, Maggie answered, her voice carrying the same quiet authority she'd used when running the farm alone. But first we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. She reached for her phone, but not the emergency one, just her regular cell. Dialing a number from memory, she waited 2 rings before a familiar voice answered. Helen, it's Maggie. Remember that conversation we had about Millbrook? I need everything you know about what happened there, everything your brother Told you Dare Helen Roberts, Oak Hollow's primary physician, had a brother on Millbrook City Council. What she revealed over the next 10 minutes painted a disturbing picture. It wasn't just intimidation, Maggie reported. To the others, after hanging up, they targeted specific businesses: the gas station near the highway, the storage facilities, places that could help them move and hide things. Drugs, Martha suggested, among other things. Frank confirmed, but they need legitimate businesses as cover. That's why they're here. Oak Hollow's perfect, small enough to control, big enough to hide in plain sight. More vendors had gathered around Maggie's stand, drawn by the discussion. The morning's fear was slowly transforming into something else: determination. My father stood up to cattle rustlers. In 62-old Tom Jenkins spoke up, said, "Giving in once means giving in forever. This isn't cattle rustlers." Tom Jack warned, "These men are organized to us." "So are we," Maggie replied quietly. She looked at the gathered faces. Farmers, craftspeople, small business owners, people who had weathered storms, droughts, and economic hardships together. Oak Hollow wasn't built by people who ran from trouble. She thought about David, about the lessons and strategy he'd shared during his visits home. "They expect us to be divided," she continued. "Scared, easy to control. We need to show them something different." "What exactly are you suggesting?" Frank asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. "When they come back, they'll find us ready, united." Maggie's voice carried clearly now. "We show them that Oak Hollow isn't Millbrook. We're not victims waiting to be saved. We're a community that stands together." Over the next hour, the market transformed. Vendors rearranged their stalls, creating clear sight lines and eliminating blind spots. Those with trucks positioned them strategically, ready for quick evacuation if needed. Everyone had a role, a position, a purpose. Frank made some calls, ensuring that state police would be nearby, not close enough to provoke the Thunder Legion, but ready to respond if things escalated. Dare Helen Roberts prepared her clinic just in case. As noon approached, Maggie felt the weight of the emergency phone in her pocket. David had given to her with clear instructions: "One call, Mom, that's all it takes. I don't care where I am or what I'm doing, I'll come." But looking at her community preparing to stand together, she knew that calling David would be a last resort. The Thunder Legion thought they were dealing with a vulnerable small town. They were about to learn that true strength doesn't always come from the outside. The distant rumble of motorcycles rose again on the horizon. Maggie took her position behind her stand, back, straight, head high. Whatever happened next would set the course for Oak Hollow's future. As the sound grew closer, she made her final decision about the phone in her pocket. She wouldn't call for help, not yet. First, they would show the Thunder Legion exactly what kind of community they had chosen to threaten. The Thunder Legion returned with twice the force. 20 bikes roared into Oak Hollow's market square, their engines drowning out all other sounds. Chuck the Hammer Davidson led them in a deliberate circle around the market's perimeter, a show of force meant to break spirits before any real confrontation began. Maggie stood her ground, noting how the bikers positioned themselves. Not random intimidation, but tactical placement. These men had military training, or at least some of them did. She could see it in their movement patterns, just as she'd seen it countless times watching David's unit during their training visits. "Quite the welcome party," Chuck called out as he dismounted, noting the unified stance of the vendors and townspeople. "Seems like you folks have been busy while we were gone." Sheriff Morrison stepped forward, his badge catching the noon sun. "Markets closing early today. Might want to do your shopping elsewhere." Chuck's laugh carried no humor. "Shopping? Nah, we're here on business." Speaking of which, he turned to Maggie's stand. "Had time to think about our offer, Mrs. Walker?" "Margaret," she corrected calmly. "And yes, we thought about it." "The answer is no." The market fell silent. Chuck's expression hardened as he studied Maggie more carefully. "You know, I did some asking around while we were gone. Interesting thing about small townspeople talk. We're running a farm alone. Son in the military must be hard handling everything by yourself." "I managed just fine," Maggie replied, noting how Chuck's men were slowly tightening their perimeter. "See, that's not how this works." Chuck moved closer, his bulk casting a shadow over her stand. "You don't get to say no. Nobody gets to say no. That's the whole point. There's always a choice," Maggie stated firmly. "Like the choice you gave him." "Brooke," Frank interrupted, "before you started using their businesses to move drugs, before people started disappearing." In Chuck's head, snapped toward the sheriff, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. Careful. Lawman, accusations like that could be dangerous for a man's health. They're not. Accusations if they're true, Maggie said quietly. We know what you really want, Oak. Hollow's location, its businesses, its rail connection, perfect for your real operation. For a moment, Shucks practiced intimidation, slipped, revealing something colder underneath. Lady, you have no idea what you're talking about or what you're dealing with. Actually, Maggie met his gaze steadily. I think we do. Ex-military, aren't you? At least some of your men. The way you move, the way you organize. This isn't just a gang, is it? This is something else. Chuck's hand moved toward his vest, but Frank's voice cut through the tension. Wouldn't do that. State police are 3 minutes out, plus every person here is recording this on their phones. Sure you want that kind of attention? Thunder Legion leader surveyed the crowd, noting the phones pointed his way. His expression shifted to something more calculating. Okay, let's try this another way. He gestured to his men, who began moving with practiced coordination. Suddenly displays were being overturned, produce scattered across the ground. It happened so fast, so efficiently, that no one could stop it. This wasn't random vandalism, it was coordinated destruction. See, here's the thing about small towns, Chuck continued calmly as chaos erupted around them. They survive on thin margins. One bad day can break a small business. 1 week of trouble can ruin a farmer. How long can you all hold out? Maggie watched as months of hard work was systematically destroyed. The Thunder Legion moved with military precision, targeting infrastructure rather than people. They weren't just creating damage, they were sending a message. This is your last chance, Chuck stated. Next time, we won't just target property. A scuffle broke out as Jack Peterson tried to protect his stand. One of the bikers, the one with the snake tattoo, threw him to the ground with professional efficiency. The crack of Jack's arm breaking cut through the chaos like a gunshot. Stop. Maggie's voice carried over the destruction. That's enough. Chuck held up his hand, and his men immediately ceased their activities. The control he had over them was absolute, military-grade discipline. Your choice, Mrs. Walker. You can handle business with us, or we can handle business our way. As Helen Roberts rushed to tend to Jack's arm, Maddie finally understood the full scope of what they were facing. This wasn't just about protection money or territory. The Thunder Legion was a well-organized force using motorcycle gang intimidation as cover for something much bigger. You have until tomorrow morning, Chuck announced to the shocked crowd. Either every business here agrees to our terms, or we start getting really unfriendly. As the Thunder Legion mounted their bikes, Maggie's hand moved to her pocket. She had wanted to handle this locally to protect her community without escalating the situation, but watching Jack being loaded into Helen's car, seeing the systematic destruction of her neighbors' livelihoods, she knew they were past that point. The emergency phone felt heavy in her hand just before Chuck rode away. He paused beside her stand. Word of advice: don't try calling for help. Phone lines have a way of going down in towns that don't cooperate. Cell towers, too. His smile was cold. We're very thorough. The bikers roared away, leaving destruction and fear in their wake. But they had made one critical mistake. The phone in Maggie's hand wasn't a regular cell phone. It was a satellite connection, set up by someone who understood exactly how to maintain communication when normal channels were compromised. As Oak Hollow's residents began cleaning up the destruction, Maggie Walker typed in the emergency code David had taught her in a military base thousands of miles away. A Navy SEAL commander was about to receive a message that would change everything. Mom in trouble. Oak Hollow compromised. Thunder Legion. The time for handling things quietly was over. Commander David Walker was finishing a mission briefing at Naval Station Norfolk when the emergency signal came through. The unique vibration pattern from his secure phone made his heart skip. In 15 years of service, his mother had never used their emergency protocol. He excused himself immediately, leaving fellow officers mid-conversation in the hallway. He checked the message, 8 words that changed everything. Mom in trouble. Oak Hollow compromised. Thunder Legion. Sir Lieutenant Mike Torres, his second in command, followed him out. Everything okay? David's mind was already shifting into operational mode, analyzing threats and resources. Need transport to Minnesota fast, and information on a motorcycle gang called the Thunder Legion. The Thunder Legion Torres's expression darkened. They're not just bikers, sir, ex-military, some of them been causing trouble. They're not just bikers, sir, ex-military, some of them been causing trouble across 3 states. Get me everything you can. Full briefing in 10. David headed for his office, his satellite phone already out. First call, Sheriff Frank Morrison. Frank, it's DAV. David Walker talked to me. The sheriff's voice came through clear but tense. They hit the market hard. David, coordinated, professional. This isn't some random gang. They're organized, trained. Jack Peterson's got a broken arm. And that's just the start. Mom, she's okay, stood her ground. But David, they're coming back tomorrow, making demands, threatening everyone. They've done this before in other towns. David's computer was already up, multiple screens showing police reports, territory maps, incident patterns. I'm seeing it. Millbrook, Preston Valley, Cedar Rapids. They take over town. Systematically, it's worse than that. Frank continued. They're using gang violence as cover for something bigger. Your mother figured it out. They're targeting specific infrastructure, railway access, storage facilities, businesses that could be used for distribution, not just drugs. Then don't think so. This is too organized, too professional. They're building something using small towns as nodes in a larger network. David's printer hummed, spitting out satellite images of Oak Hollow and surrounding areas. I'm coming home. Frank, can you hold them off until morning? We'll try, but David, be careful. These guys have connections, high-level ones. Local cops who've tried investigating them end up transferred, or worse. Torres entered with a thick file, laying it on David's desk. Thunder Legion intel, sir, and I've got a C-130 prepped at Langley. Can have you wheels up in 30 minutes. David ended the call with Frank and opened the file. The first page confirmed his suspicions. Thunder Legion wasn't just a gang, it was a front former. Special forces operators, private military contractors, all working under the guise of bikers. Their leader, Torres, pointed to a photo. Charles Chuck Davidson, ex-Army Rangers, dishonorable discharge, but look who he's been meeting with. The next photo showed Chuck with men in expensive suits taken outside a private airport. Corporate connections. Better. Torres pulled out another document. Defense contractors, private security firms. The Thunder Legion isn't just taking over towns, they're building infrastructure for something bigger. David studied the pattern maps, his tactical training, recognizing the strategy. They're creating a shadow network using small towns as cover, removing something valuable, something that needs professional security and military precision. His secure phone buzzed again, a message from his mother. They're watching the roads, planning to cut communications tomorrow, sir. Torres hesitated. If they've got the connections, I think they do. Going in officially could cause problems. Lot of brass doesn't want attention drawn to private military contractors operating domestically. David closed the file, his decision made. Then we don't go in officially. He opened his desk drawer, removing a small box. Inside was a plain silver ring, his father's wedding band, which his mother had given him before his first deployment. Get me Chief Parker and Lieutenant Rodriguez. Have them meet us at Langley. And Mike, we do this quiet, no uniforms, no official channels. What's the mission profile, sir? David tucked his father's ring into his pocket. Protection and intelligence gathered. We find out what they're really building in these towns, but first priority is securing Oak Hollow. Rules of engagement: defensive only. We're not starting a war. David checked his weapons locker, selecting items that could be carried discreetly, but if they want to bring military tactics to my hometown, they're about to learn why Navy SEALs set the standard for close quarters combat. As David prepared for departure, his screen showed more data about Thunder Legion's activities: shell companies, property acquisitions, mysterious shipments. Whatever they were building, it was sophisticated and well-funded. One more thing, he told Torres, get me everything you can on Chuck Davidson's military record, the real one, not the public file. I want to know exactly what got him discharged. His phone vibrated one final time. Another message from Oak Hollow. They're setting up surveillance, professional equipment. These aren't just bikers. No, David murmured, studying Chuck's photo. They're not, but they made one serious mistake. He grabbed his go bag, already packed for emergencies. They threatened the wrong family in the wrong town. As David headed for the waiting transport, he knew this wouldn't be a simple confrontation between a SEAL and some bikers. This was about something bigger: organized crime hiding behind a veil of legitimate security operations. But right now, none of that mattered as much as one simple fact: someone had threatened his mother, and David Walker had spent 15 years becoming very, very good at handling threats. Night had fallen over Oak Hollow as Maggie Walker sat at her kitchen table studying old maps of the town spread out before her. Each strategic location the Thunder Legion might target was marked: the railway depot, grain storage, key intersections. In the soft lamp light, her fingers traced routes and alternate paths through the town she'd known all her life. The back door opened, and Sheriff Morrison entered quietly. They've set up checkpoints on County Road 7 in the old mill road. Professional equipment, night vision, radio communications. How many men? Maggie asked, not looking up from her maps. At least 30 now, more arriving every few hours. Frank pulled up a chair. They're not even pretending to be just bikers anymore. These new ones, they move like military. Meanwhile, 30,000 feet above Kansas, David Walker studied similar maps on his laptop while the C-130 carried him and his small team homeward. Lieutenant Torres sat across from him reviewing intelligence updates. Chuck Davidson's real file just came through. Torres reported he wasn't just Rangers, he ran specialized operations. Off the book stuff. Got discharged after an operation in South America went bad. Something about missing weapons shipments, and now he's holding his own operation. David concluded, using motorcycle gang intimidation as cover for something bigger. Chief Parker, a seasoned SEAL with gray threading his temples, leaned forward. Local police in 3 states report unusual shipping patterns around Thunder Legion territory. Large trucks moving at night, heavy security. No official paperwork. Back in Oak Hollow, Helen Roberts arrived at Maggie's house with her medical bag. Jack's arm is set, but I'm worried about others, some of the older folks. The stress is getting to them. And the Thunder Legion's been visiting people individually, making threats. They're trying to break us apart, Maggie said finally, looking up. Create division before they make their real move on the C-130. Lieutenant Rodriguez pulled up surveillance photos. Their corporate connections run deep. Private security firms, defense contractors, whatever they're moving through these towns, it's valuable enough to need professional protection and dangerous enough to need deniability, David added, which is why they used the gang image as cover in Oak Hollow. Martha Henderson's voice trembled as she reported the latest developments. The Johnson are talking about accepting their terms after what happened to Jack. People are scared, and now there's talk about our shipments being blocked, supplies being stopped. That's their pattern, Frank confirmed. Isolate, divide, then conquer. By the time people realize what's really happening, it's too late. David's satellite phone buzzed with an encrypted message from his intelligence contacts. Thunder Legion's been buying up properties through shell companies, storage facilities, transportation hubs, all connected to major distribution routes. Sir Torres pointed to a document. Look at their communication patterns. They're not just coordinating between towns, they're reporting to someone. Someone big. Maggie's house had become a makeshift command center for Oak Hollow's resistance. Jack Peterson arrived, arm in a sling, determination in his eyes. Found something you need to see. He spread photos on the table, surveillance images of Thunder Legion members meeting with men in suits at private airfields. They're not just targeting Oak Hollow. Frank realized we're part of something bigger. A network in the air. David received another intelligence update, got confirmation on their corporate backing. These aren't just random towns they're taking over. They're building infrastructure for private military operations on us soil using criminal intimidation as cover, Chief Parker added. Smart, who investigates a motorcycle gang for military-grade weapons trafficking. Back in Oak Hollow, Maggie heard engines approaching through her window. She watched Thunder Legion members setting up new surveillance positions. Their movements were precise, coordinated, nothing like ordinary bikers. They're preparing for something. Frank observed this level of security. They're either expecting trouble or protecting something valuable. Maggie finished. Something that's coming soon on the C-130. David's team plotted their insertion strategy. We land at the private airfield outside Minneapolis. He explained. Local contact will have vehicles waiting. We go in quiet, establish surveillance, gather intel before making any moves. Timeline, Torres asked. We've got 6 hours until dawn. That's when they'll make their push to take control of the town in Oak Hollow. As midnight Approached Maggie received another message from David, "Hold position, we're coming, don't let them divide the town before we arrive." But even as she read the message, she heard more motorcycles arriving. The Thunder Legion was building up forces faster than expected through her window. She watched Chuck Davidson directing his men with military precision, establishing a perimeter around Oak Hollow. "They know," Frank said quietly. "Somehow they know help is coming. That's why they're accelerating their timeline." Maggie studied the deployment of forces around her town, recognizing the tactical pattern David had once explained to her. They weren't just surrounding Oak Hollow, they were preparing for a siege. "Dawn's coming early," she told Frank, "and we need to be ready above America's heartland." David Walker checked his watch. 5 hours until touchdown, 6 until they could reach Oak Hollow. He just hoped it would be enough time, because somewhere in the darkness ahead the Thunder Legion was preparing to demonstrate why they were more than just a motorcycle gang. They were about to reveal their true purpose, and Oak Hollow was caught in the middle of something far more dangerous than simple small-town intimidation. 3 hours before dawn, Oak Hollow's main street erupted with activity. Thunder Legion members moved with military precision, setting up checkpoints at every major intersection. Their motorcycles were now accompanied by black SUVs with tinted windows, vehicles that spoke of professional security operations rather than gang activity. Maggie watched from her darkened living room as 2 men in tactical gear installed surveillance cameras on the power poles. Their movements were practiced, efficient, nothing like the bikers who'd first arrived at the market. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore," Frank Morrison observed, keeping his voice low. "Look at that equipment. That's military-grade stuff." A knock at the back door made them both tense, but it was only Jack Peterson, his broken arm in a sling. "Got something you need to see." He spread several photos on Maggie's kitchen table. "Took these an hour ago at the old grain depot." The images showed Legion members unloading large crates from unmarked trucks, but it was the men supervising the operation that caught Maggie's attention. Suits and ties rather than leather vests. Meanwhile, David Walker's team was on the ground outside Minneapolis, gathering their own intelligence. Satellite shows increased activity across their entire network. Torres reported studying his laptop screen in their unmarked van. "Whatever they're planning in Oak Hollow, it's part of something bigger. Much bigger," Chief Parker added, hanging up his phone. "Just got word from ARC contact in federal law enforcement. Thunder Legion's been connected to private military shipments disappearing from bases across 3 states." David studied the pattern map they'd assembled. "They're not just taking over towns, they're building a shadow infrastructure using small-town businesses as cover for moving military grade equipment." Back in Oak Hollow, Chuck Davidson walked Main Street like he already owned it, inspecting his men's positions. He stopped at Maggie's market stand, still set up from yesterday's confrontation. "You know," he called out, knowing she could hear him from her house. Most people would have packed up and run by now. "Guess that military son of yours passed on some of that stubbornness." Inside, Maggie's hand tightened on her coffee cup. They knew about David. The question was, how much did they know? "Got movement," Frank whispered, pointing to the railway depot. More unmarked trucks were arriving, accompanied by motorcycles and SUVs on the outskirts of Minneapolis. David received an urgent update from his intelligence contacts. "Sir, we've got confirmation. Thunder Legion's not just moving weapons, they're transporting entire weapon systems, things that shouldn't be on us soil, using small towns as cover." Torres added, who looks twice at grain shipments and storage depots in farming communities. David's jaw tightened. "That's why they need total control of these towns. One person asking the wrong questions could expose everything in Oak Hollow." Martha Henderson slipped into Maggie's house through the back door, carrying her iPad. "You need to see this." She pulled up security footage from her son's hardware store. The video showed Thunder Legion members discussing their plans, not realizing the store's cameras could record audio. "Once the shipment's in place," one man was saying, "we initiate full lockdown. No one in or out without clearance, just like Millbrook schedules." "Accelerated," another replied. "Boss wants the facility operational before." The man stopped suddenly, looking around as if sensing he'd said too much. David's team was now 30 minutes outside Oak Hollow, maintaining radio silence as they approached Thunder Legion's commanding officer just arrived in town. Torres reported checking drone footage. Ex-military contractor specializes in setting up private security operations in conflict zones. They're not preparing for a gang takeover. Chief Parker realized they're establishing a military-grade secure zone using civilian infrastructure as cover in Oak Hollow. Maggie noticed something about the Thunder Legion's deployment pattern, the way they positioned their forces. They weren't just controlling access points, they were protecting specific routes through town. Routes that all led to the railway depot, she said, suddenly spreading out her town maps. Everything connects there, the grain storage, the trucking routes, the back roads. They're securing, they're not just taking over the town, they're building a distribution hub. Frank finished, hidden in plain sight. Who questions farm equipment and grain shipments moving through rural America? David's satellite phone buzzed with an urgent message from his mother. They're moving something big into the railway depot. Military trucks disguised as farm equipment. Whatever they're planning, it's happening now, Sir. Torres called from the front of their vehicle. Thermal imaging shows heavy activity at the depot, multiple vehicles, armed personnel. They're setting up serious security in Oak Hollow. Chuck Davidson's voice carried through the pre-dawn darkness as he addressed his men. Lockdown protocols in effect. No one enters or leaves without authorization. Any resistance is handled with extreme prejudice. Maggie watched more tactical teams deploying through her town, their movements showing clear military training. These weren't bikers playing at being soldiers. These were professionals using a gang's reputation as cover for something far more dangerous. Dawn's coming, Frank said quietly, and when it does, Maggie finished, we'll see exactly what they're hiding at that depot and why they were willing to take over an entire town to protect it. David checked his weapons one last time as they approached Oak Hollow's outskirts. We go in quiet, he told his team. Observe and gather intel, but if they're moving military hardware through civilian towns, then this stopped being a local problem, Chief Parker concluded. This is national security. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten as both sides prepared for what was coming. In less than an hour, Oakle would become either the front line in exposing a massive weapons trafficking operation, or the latest town to fall under the control of an organization that had mastered hiding military operations behind criminal intimidation. And somewhere in the darkness, a mother and son were about to remind the Thunder Legion why some threats should never be made against family. Dawn painted Oak Hollow's sky in shades of gray as David's team established their first observation post on the town's outskirts through high-powered optics. They watched Thunder Legion's operation with growing concern. That's not standard gang security, Chief Parker murmured. Studying their deployment pattern, they've got overlapping fields of fire, counter surveillance measures, professional C systems, because they're not really bikers. Tor has added monitoring radio frequencies. Listen to their communication protocols. That's private military contractor stuff. At the railway depot, Chuck Davidson supervised the arrival of more unmarked trucks. His leather vest was gone, replaced by tactical gear that matched his military bearing. These weren't the same men who had threatened the farmers' market. This was the Thunder Legion's true face. Mom's in position, David reported, checking his encrypted phone. She says they're moving something big into the depot's main storage area. Multiple security teams, serious hardware. Inside Oak Hollow, Maggie Walker watched the operation from her kitchen window. While maintaining a quiet phone connection with her son, the Thunder Legion had transformed overnight, shedding their biker facade for something more professional and far more dangerous. They'd got the whole depot locked down, she whispered into her phone, but something's not right. Some of their own people looked nervous, especially around those storage containers they brought in. That because they don't all know what they're really guarding. David replied softly, Ma, we've got confirmation they're moving military-grade weapon systems, things that shouldn't be anywhere near us. Soil. Frank Morrison joined Maggie at her window. His sheriff's training, taking in details. They're newer people, the ones in tactical gear. They're setting up for a long-term operation. This isn't just about controlling the town anymore. And through his scope, David noticed something about the Thunder Legion security pattern. They're not just watching the perimeter. They're watching their own people, making sure nobody gets too close to those containers, Sir Torres called quietly. Got movement at the depot's east entrance. Some kind of inspection team arriving. The unmarked SUVs carried men in expensive suits, not corporate types, but something else. They moved with the same alertness David recognized from intelligence operations. Check their approach pattern, he instructed his team. Multiple vehicles. Coordinated movement. These aren't businessmen in Oak Hollow. Martha Henderson slipped through back alleys to reach Maggie's house carrying her iPad. More footage from the hardware store cameras. She reported they were talking about demonstration samples and buyer inspection. Whatever they're storing at the depot, someone's coming to see it. Weapons buyers, Frank concluded grimly. They're not just moving the stuff through town, they're using Oak Hollow as a showroom. David's team monitored the depot with growing concern. The newly arrived inspection team carried themselves like foreign military officers trying to blend in as civilians. Sir Torres reported checking intelligence updates. Facial recognition. Just flagged 2 of them known arms dealers with connections to restricted markets. They're really doing it, Chief, Parker said quietly, using small-town America to hide international weapons deals. Who'd ever look here inside the depot? Chuck Davidson led his visitors with professional courtesy that seemed out of place for a biker gang leader. Through the hardware store's surveillance feed, Maggie and Frank watched the interaction. Our distribution network is completely secure, Chuck was saying. Local law enforcement is controlled. Transportation routes are established. We can move product anywhere east of the Mississippi without raising flags. And the locals, one visitor asked, his accent slightly foreign. Won't be a problem. We're implementing full control protocols just like Millbrook. David's satellite phone vibrated. Another message from his mother. Something's happening. Their security teams are spreading out, starting to move through town. They're initiating lockdown. Torres confirmed, monitoring their communications, starting to control all movement in and out of Oak Hollow. Maggie watched from her window as Thunder Legion members began going door to door, their professional manner making their intentions clear. This wasn't gang intimidation anymore. This was military style population control. Time to move, Chief Parker asked David quietly. Not yet. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with first. David studied the depot through his scope. Mom, can you get closer to those storage containers? We need to confirm what they're showing. Those buyers already on it, Maggie replied. She'd spent decades learning every inch of Oak Hollow. There were way through town that even the Thunder Legion surveillance couldn't cover. But as she prepared to move, Chuck Davidson's voice carried across the morning air. Attention, Oak Hollow residents. This is now a secure zone. Anyone seen outside their homes without proper authorization will be detained. This is your only warning. David watched through his scope as more tactical teams deployed through town. The Thunder Legion had dropped all pretense of being just another motorcycle gang. Now they were showing their true nature, a private military force using criminal intimidation as cover for something far more dangerous. Sir Torres called urgently. Thermal imaging is picking up something in those containers, something that matches the profile of. He paused, double-checking his reading. Sir, if these signatures are right, they're not just moving weapons, they're moving entire weapon systems. Things that could destabilize regions if they get to the wrong buyers in Oak Hollow. Maggie made her decision. Frank, she said quietly, get everyone ready. If they're going to control this town, they'll have to prove they can control every single one of us first. The morning sun finally cleared, the horizon illuminating a town transformed. Oak Hollow had become ground zero for exposing an international weapons operation, but first its residents would have to show the Thunder Legion why small towns weren't as helpless as they seemed. And David Walker, watching it all unfold through his scope, knew that the time for subtle observation was running out soon. He would have to remind these private military contractors why Navy SEALs were considered the world's elite fighting force. The morning sun illuminated a changed Oak Hollow. Thunder Legion's security teams moved house to house implementing their control protocols. But they were finding an unexpected problem: empty homes, missing residents, a town that seemed to have quietly melted away. Overnight, something's wrong, Chuck Davidson realized, studying reports from his team's population count is way under estimates. Where are they? Inside the old grain mill, now a makeshift command center for the towns. Resistance. Maggie Walker smiled slightly. Oak Hollow had spent generations creating hidden storage spaces, secret passages, underground connections between buildings. What looked like a simple farming town had depths these outsiders couldn't imagine. How many? Frank Morris asked, checking his list. Almost 200, Maggie replied. Safe in the old prohibition tunnels and storm cellars. They can't control people they can't find. David's team watched the Thunder Legion's growing frustration through their scopes. They're doubling patrols. Torres reported starting property searches, but they don't know the town's layout like the locals do in the railway. Dio, the foreign buyers were growing nervous. You assured us this area was secure, one said to Chuck, his accent more pronounced with stress. It is secure, Chuck insisted, though his expression showed concern. Just some locals playing games, they'll learn. But Oak Hollow wasn't playing games. The town was implementing plans they'd prepared overnight. Small acts of resistance began popping up everywhere. Roads suddenly developed mysterious mechanical problems. Power fluctuated in strategic areas. Communications experienced unexpected interference. They're using the town itself against us, one of Chuck's lieutenants reported. Every system we try to control, something goes wrong, like the whole place is rigged. Because it is, David murmured, watching through his scope. Mom's got them using every trick Dad taught us about passive resistance. Death by 1,000 cuts. The Thunder Legion's tactical teams found themselves dealing with endless small problems. Vehicles developed flat tires, equipment malfunctioned every time they secured an area. Problems would appear somewhere else. They're adapting, Chief Parker observed, switching to foot patrols, tightening their perimeter around the depot. Getting serious inside the grain mill. Maggie coordinated with her neighbors through an old CB radio network.